It's been announced today that President Trump is going into Chicago. He says it's time to take over the city, clean up the crimes. It's what the residents want. Brandon Johnson and the governor, Pritzker, they are avoiding this. We're going to get deep into this and other big stories. To help me go through that, I have Mike Howell. Mike, thank you for joining me again.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So, just so my audience knows, Mike Howell is the president of the Oversight Project. They sue the government. They keep the government in line. They request FOIAs. They're working on some big stories that I want to get into. So I just saw today that even though we're getting crime cleaned up in Washington, D.C., the police are actually allowed to do their job, arrest gang members, criminals, drug traffickers. Now, the District of Columbia is suing President Trump, the Defense Department, Pete Hegseth, the Army. They want them out of there. Crime is down. As you mentioned off air, they are able to finally do their job. Why on earth do the Democrats have to take the exact opposite position of Trump? Like, if things are good, why on earth are they now suing so that criminals can start up operations again?
Yeah, I mean that's a fundamental question, right? The descent of the American left and Democratic Party into just pro-criminal at this stage, and it's taken various shapes and forms over the decades. But I think BLM was really the final straw where the mask dropped, where it was fundamentally about just like, no, we're okay with crime because we believe that the alternative, which is law enforcement, is worse than crime itself. And that was based off of, racial animosity. And that was the line they got adopted through various vectors, like DEI and corporations and whatnot, obviously through the social and cultural space, but also in law enforcement networks. The amount of movement, what happened in that summer of love really was like the professionalization of left-wing operators in law enforcement. So now you have cities populated with left-wing police chiefs who aren't really interested in law enforcement, or the district attorneys that Soros puts in, and mayors that only can get past the political system if they are pro-crime. And ultimately, why do they want that? Look, that's a sick and deep question. I don't think anybody should want anyone to get hurt, but I think it's more of a question is why they don't want law enforcement. And they don't want law enforcement because it picks out a lot of the pieties and contradictions that the left now stands upon on matters of, primarily racial issues, but also urban issues. They don't like crime stats. And so when you arrest people, you get crime stats. And so the best way not to have crime stats is not to arrest people. They don't like, their view is mass incarceration. And so anything to lower it. And it's a mess, but now it's a central plank of a major American political party.
Okay. Well, they go on camera and say, we're working with the Trump administration, murders down double digits, homicides down, carjackings, muggings, sexual assault, all down. Let's sue them so that those numbers can make a comeback. I don't know. It's very bizarre to me, but now it looks like the Department of Homeland Security has drafted a letter to President Trump desperately requesting the National Guard and a surge in law enforcement to the city of Chicago. So help is on its way to Chicago, as Governor Pritzker said, there is no problem. And then they had dozens of shootings and several people die. Then just this week, 54 more shootings, 8 people dead. They are going into Chicago. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So a couple of things that I think are important for viewers to understand is why DC is a little different than Chicago. And so what you're seeing in DC is since DC is owned and operated by the federal government per the Constitution, yet for the last 50 years, Congress has let it manage itself. There's a threat, the sort of Damocles hanging over DC, that the federal government could take away their local governance structure and reabsorb it into its rightful place in the Constitution. And so therefore, what you see in DC is like more public cooperation between DC and the Trump administration, because they ultimately don't want to get reabsorbed into the federal government. They want to keep their own corrupt little local government going. That's why you see these kind of like public gestures of Mayor Bowser, the mayor here, saying kind of nice things about Trump. And Trump said kind of nice things about her. We were joking, I guess she's MAGA Muriel now in like the 90% Democrat district. But that's a variable at play that makes DC distinct. And as you mentioned, today, DC sued the Trump administration. So much for holding hands and arresting the gangbangers. And on that point, this is basic legal stuff. The federal government owns DC. The federal government cannot sue itself. You can sue me, I can sue you, but I can't sue me and you can't sue you, right? So DC can't even sue the federal government. So hopefully that thing gets tossed out of court and Trump remains in control. In Chicago, it's a little different. Trump has some of the same tools in his toolkit, the National Guard, the Insurrection Act. And those are the tools that I think he'll seek to deploy. But it's going to be more, there's less ability to arrest people and enforce law there because you can enforce federal law than in DC, since it's a federal enclave. You can virtually do anything you want since the feds own it. So it'll play out differently. It'll be more difficult. I expect it to focus primarily on gang activity, FBI raids on gangs, which run Chicago, and illegal immigration. So you'll see a lot of that.
Okay, well, maybe it won't be the National Guard. Maybe it will be Department of Homeland Security and ICE and the FBI that are maybe the front moved in people. Before I play this clip from Fox News about going into Chicago, do you think part of them cooperating, you mentioned that they don't want to be reabsorbed and controlled by the federal government. Is that because down the road, Democrats are desperate to make DC a state so that they can pick up 2 more Democrat senators?
Yeah, of course. And it kind of just puts on blast the fact that DC hasn't been capable of democracy. For the same reason a lot of countries in the Middle East aren't capable of democracy. DC has not been able to govern itself over the last 50 years. It's gotten worse every year as time's gone, along. And it's not only crime, but, just the entirety of DC is worse off since it's had home rule. And just to go back really quickly, I do think the National Guard will have a presence in Chicago and Illinois. It'll just be different in terms of the enforcement activities. They'll be there to in the streets to maintain order. But it's not like they can adopt, all the duties of your Chicago PD in terms of the federal law enforcement. So different buckets for different people, different tools in the toolkit. But yeah, Democrats, they want to jam the Senate. They're open about this. They want to add new states that can get them more Democrat seats. The same reason they opened the border is because they need to make new ways to win a democracy instead of winning hearts and minds of people already here. DC obviously should not be a state. This was decided a long time ago. There's many ways to cut this cake. If your interest truly was political representation for those people, you could reabsorb parts of it into Maryland. You could divide Maryland into 2 and make the Eastern Shore of Maryland, which is deep red, a Republican state, and put DC into Baltimore. But they don't want that. You nailed it on the head. They want to add senators because they can't win other states fairly.
Yeah. All right. Let me show this clip from Fox News about going into Chicago. And then Obama's David Axelrod said, Democrats are getting it all wrong and they are going to lose elections. Let's watch this and then we'll move to that.
It's not just the National Guard. Multiple sources telling Fox News that ICE agents are set to move into Chicago for an immigration crackdown. Now, that city's Democratic leaders are expected to resist, but many locals, like our next guest, say it is a long time coming. But Sean Tunsil will join us in a moment, talk about the resident sentiments in a moment there in Chicago. But first, the senior correspondent Mike Tobin, who's got a beat on this every day in Chicago. Mike.
And Bill, we know that some federal staff is already at the Great Lakes Naval Base north of Chicago, and Illinois Senators Tammy Duckworth and Dick Durbin are demanding that the Secretary of the Navy provide them with some information for how that base is going to be used. And then a meeting of North suburban leaders was told that some 300 federal agents are expected in Chicagoland. Now, the mayor of Broadview, a suburb to the west of Chicago, issued a letter stating that a building there will be used as primary processing facility for operations, which could last for 45 days. And law enforcement should be ready for protests, even destruction of property. Tom Homan, border czar under President Trump, argues that sanctuary policies pushed by Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson and Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker forced them to zero in on places like Chicago.
We're going to flood the zone. Sanctuary cities, I've said it 1,000 times. They're going to get exactly what they don't want: more agents in the communities and more worksite enforcement. If they won't let us arrest a bad guy in the safety and security of a county jail, so more collateral arrests are going to occur in sanctuary cities because you forced this into the community.
They're cracking down. Now, instead of, you've got Duckworth and Durbin, the senators there, instead of saying, how can we be helpful, make this 45 days a great operation to clean things up, they're literally there trying to procedurally slow Trump down, slow walk this, block him from doing his job. Don't these people end up looking bad? Because I had another guest that said one thing that President Trump did was he woke up these Democrat cities to the fact that if their leaders wanted, they could actually clean up crime.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. But what we're seeing on full display, and I think really gets guys like Axelrod going, is the Democrat Party used to be able to straddle both sides of that fence, right? You'd have presentable, articulate candidates that, could speak mainstream language, but still dog whistle to the Marxist elements of their base and present as, hey, we want law enforcement. We just think the way the Republicans are doing it is wrong. We have a gentler, softer, but more effective way. Now, as the base of the party has grown larger and more extreme, the politicians are just not even straddling that fence. That class is dying out. The Axelrods of old or Bill Clintons of old are gone. They're replaced with Mondami. And you can see Obama in current form is very different than how Obama was in, his presidential form. It's a different party with different politicians who no longer need to appeal. And that's due to very large demographic changes in this country of mass migration, and then coupled with cultural degradation, where you have environments where you get guys like Mondami. And I'm sorry, but Mondami is the future of American politics on the left. We are a country of extremes on that side. And the politicians will continue to be like Mayor Johnson. And so, no, they can't be embarrassed because, unfortunately, it's what a lot of their voters want. These people are electing these people, and there's no opening their eyes to it at the end of the day. So there's no world in my mind, and I've spent a lot of time in Chicago for some of our investigations, particularly undercover ones, and some of the dangerous elements there. It's bad, but the people don't seem to mind it, or at least blame policy or politicians for it. And so, look, President Trump is the chief law enforcement officer of the country. He's got a duty to keep it safe, and that's what he's doing through guys like Tom Homan.
Yeah. All right. Now, I love President Trump, and I'm grateful that he won. But Congress continues to bury us in debt with reckless spending. They're just now back in office, and you watch, they're going to pass a continuing resolution, kick the can down the road, and spend us into oblivion. Bank failures, exploding debt, the BRICS nations attacking the US dollar, inflation eating away at your paycheck. It's all converging, and the US dollar is buckling under the pressure. Our currency faces threats from every angle, from Russia to China to the BRICS nations and other foreign powers. But it's Congress. Congress is the biggest enemy of the American people. And honestly, I wish it wasn't this way. I don't want it to be this way, right? But this is one of the reasons that I have protected myself with gold and silver. And you can protect yourself and your future as well. Don't let Washington's failure become your tragedy. I want you to visit StephenLovesGold.com or call 800-608-1770 and move your wealth into safe haven assets before it's too late. Gold and silver are the very best. Go ahead and give them a call today. I find it interesting that Obama says he loves his black brothers and sisters. He loves Chicago, and his biggest concern is climate change, yet he abandoned Chicago to move to the coast of Martha's Vineyard and live in a giant $12 million mansion. Let me show this clip from Axelrod, because he says, you guys are making a huge mistake. The American people are going to see you fighting for criminals and crime. Let's go ahead and watch that together.
I would be careful about playing 28 politics on this issue, because the right answer is we'll take all the help we can get, as long as it's appropriate help, as long as it's stuff that will really help. I mean, these National Guardsmen aren't even trained to do that work. They're not authorized to do that work. So, send us the resources that we need. We want to work with you. If there are criminal if there are people doing violent crimes here who are illegal immigrants, we want them out of our city. We'll work with you on that. I think that's the appropriate position to take.
Right. So the appropriate position is we'll take any help that we can get. As you mentioned, we may have a softer way of doing it, but let's use these resources and clean this up. You know, as long as the Democrat Party continues to lean into criminals and illegals and drugs and murder and all that, like they're just going to continue to lose, which I'm okay with. I don't mind them, but you've got people like Brandon Johnson saying that this is racism, that they're being targeted, that their gun issue is because of red states, not because of the people pulling the trigger that live in their city. His approval rating is 17%. If he continues to fight this, I don't think this guy gets reelected.
Yep. I'm not so sure about that. I mean, look, maybe the powers to be will recognize that the urban centers are out of control, and they, through the Democratic apparatus writ large, understand they'll never win national elections again. And so they need to solve for this extremist urban center leader problem that they have. And that's what Axelrod's basically saying. He's making a general election argument, right? He's saying, we're never going to win at the national level if this is what we do. And he's right there. But where he's wrong, and where Pritzker and Mayor Johnson may be right, is, well, that's how you win a Democratic primary in these cities. And so as like the power center and the age and the demographics of the Democratic Party centers in on just a few massive states scattered throughout the country, and those become the de facto leaders, and you cloud out the ability of somebody to later swoop into the general and basically get things back to a more, we'll call it, mainstream track. And I think that's what Axelrod is trying to do. But I'm not holding out any hope. And I think Mondami's a lesson here is you don't run to the middle if you're trying to get elected as a Democrat in, you know, an urban center. You run as far to the left as possible. And so you do things like, instead of blaming the black teens for the murder rates in DC and Chicago, you blame the red states. And people buy that because it's what they want to hear, that it's somebody else's fault, when the problem is very obvious for anybody who's looking at the numbers, which are obviously being cooked in all these places as well.
Yeah. Earlier, you mentioned Black Lives Matter. In the last 24 months, there's been over 700 murders in Chicago. 80% of those were Black Americans. Why isn't Black Lives Matter helping in Chicago versus buying mansions in white neighborhoods? And why isn't the Democrat Party, that literally can't win without the black vote, doing nothing? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's more a psychological problem that presents in a political one over time. And I put it this way the other day, that even like a well-to-do white Democrat in Washington, D.C. is more afraid of being called racist than they are being carjacked. And right now, the political linguistics of the whole thing has moved to such a place where to say anything that isolates root causes of the problems, and they're different in different communities. Like, this isn't like a racist argument. It's, we have drug problems in Appalachia, American white communities that represent differently, but it's an undeniable fact that in urban centers with high concentrations, particularly of, you know, teenage young African-American males, we have huge violent gun crime problems and other violent crime problems. That's just how it bears out. And so to say that out loud isn't going to get you any votes in a Democrat primary. What people will buy is comfort food. And that is always, it is somebody else's fault. And the funny thing about that is, you know what that kind of politics is called? It's called fascism. That's what they sold in the rise of fascist, you know, Europe. If you look particularly at Italy, you know, the power of crowds, and telling the crowds that they were right on everything and it was someone else's fault. And so obviously the intellectual and ideological infrastructure of the American political discourse has fallen apart to cartoon levels of Marvel movies. But it's unfortunate what we're seeing now, and I don't think there's an antidote in sight.
Okay. President Trump must have had some time on his hands last night. He was putting Governor Pritzker sumo fighting Chris Christie. He was putting his own head on Mount Everest. He also put this one up with Adam Schiff from California.
Anyone who stands up to the president, anyone who criticizes the president, anyone who says anything adverse to the president's interests gets the full weight of the federal government brought down on them.
Adam Schiff, he's always trying to keep that guy in the news, whether it's the mortgage fraud, the Russiagate story, his Autopen pardon. Where are we at with reversing the Autopen pardons?
Yeah, so we dropped a massive document a couple weeks ago, and it's all due to Eagle Ed Martin over at DOJ, who's the pardon officer now. So he's in charge of the whole office where everything, kind of went down from DOJ's perspective. He gave an email that basically was the top lawyer at Biden's DOJ. This is Merrick Garland's most relied upon and pointed to career guy he's always right. Everyone should listen to him. He's the top guy. But basically, during the Autopen pardon spree, this guy wrote an email the Saturday morning after it was January 18th. So, 2 days left in Biden's term. After the January 17th Autopen pardon spree for quote unquote nonviolent criminal offenders. But guess what? The thing was so sloppy that it applied to a bunch of violent criminal offenders. And the lawyer was basically saying, for a million reasons, we can't effectuate these things. You got to solve for and give presidential instruction on how to do this. And not to mention that it was historic in its own right. It was the largest single grant of clemency and commutation, which means the reduction of sentences. So what does that all mean? That means there are still people in jail right now who had their sentences shortened by Joe Biden. So they would be released under Trump as things they currently went on autopilot. So what we've been advising the White House and everybody else that will listen to do is to refuse to release those people. Say, look, we're agreeing with Biden's DOJ that their pardons are no good and its Autopen pardon spree wasn't good. And so the first case should be not releasing these violent criminals back onto the streets. Now that is step one, right? Where we obviously want to get is the application of the theory to the pardons of Schiff, Fauci, et cetera, and that means charging those people with crimes. And then when they try to assert their funky Autopen pardon, we have that legal fight out then, which I think will win. And so that's what we've been pushing for since day one. And hopefully we get there quickly now with this document that came out.
Okay. Speaking of Dr. Fauci and Autopen, Senator Rand Paul said a couple of really big things in an interview last night. Let me bring that up. We'll listen to it and then we'll react to it together.
After you once again renewed a criminal referral for Anthony Fauci. This is something I've been talking about a lot because I saw the smoking gun of him trying to get his colleagues to all say there's no way this was a lab generated virus. And there's a very good reason for him to have done that after he knew full well that the United States had funded some gain of function research. And it was walking and quacking and it had web feet and everybody knew. And that was, I think that deserves who cares what I think. But what are the chances that he's held to account someday at this point?
Yeah, big question is the Autopen, whether Autopen pardons are constitutional or legal or lawful. We do know that when President Obama first signed a law by Autopen, when he came back from his trip to India, he quickly did sign it in person to make sure it was seen as being legitimate. So I think there is some question there. I can tell you that we are pouring through millions of bits of data on Anthony Fauci. There will be a subpoena in short fashion, and there also will be news in the next week or two about things that we have found from poring over the records. There's going to be significant revelation about Anthony Fauci in the next week.
Any idea what those revelations might be? And then your thoughts on him pointing out that Obama had this big legislation while out of the country. When he comes back, he makes sure to use his actual ink signature so that the courts would see it as legitimate. Your thoughts on that?
I have a little inkling on what could be coming down the pike here. I'll tell you this. I don't want to get ahead of Senator Paul and his great team, and I don't know all the details. I just have a general theory. We'll put it that way. Okay. That him and Bobby Kennedy, the Secretary of HHS, are very close. Guess what? Senator Bobby Kennedy has access to all of the Fauci information, everything, the digital government records. And so I'm sure there's a lot of cooperation that's occurring. And I'm sure that if Senator Paul and his team went through in a dogged way, they found something that stood out. And he's obviously been on this issue from every last angle over the course, ever since COVID started. But now he has, access to a whole bunch more information to help tie it up. So I think he's probably tied something up. On the Autopen issue that he raised there, and look, I love when people talk about the Autopen. I wish he would have said it a little differently. The issue with Biden's use of the Autopen, which differentiates it from previous presidents' usages of it, and keep in mind, I'm still not saying that's okay. I'm still saying presidents should sign everything. But the issue with Biden that makes it doubly worse and unique is the lack of capacity and awareness. It'd be one thing if President said, I broke my arm. I can't sign this document. Autopen it for me. I love what the bill says. I read the whole thing. Use the Autopen. It's a whole separate thing if you have a president and the lights are on, but no one's home and his staff's running the country for him. And they use the Autopen to affix his signature to documents to keep the White House going as if everything's okay. And that's what makes the scale and type and degree of the Biden Autopen usage so categorically different. And so the Obama comparison, historically interesting and helpful, but not the core point right here.
Okay. The other thing that's very interesting to me was just how many people at the White House said they were in no communication with Biden. So it's like, who was really putting these names forward? Who was making these requests? I would hope that there would be some kind of a paper trail on that, because that paper trail will most likely not lead back to the president. And as you mentioned, that one DOJ guy on a Saturday writes in, hey, we need presidential insight. Like we can't just be doing this because somebody put a piece of paper under the Autopen and hit write. So hopefully we will get to that. Of course, RFK Jr. being grilled by Democrats up on the Hill today and doing a masterful job. Mike Howell, thank you so much for everything that you guys do. I'm going to put a direct link to your X as well as to the Oversight Project. Thank you so much for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Hey, you too. Thank you for having me.